Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. Welcome back to another episode of Adventure Capital, where we discuss the entrepreneurial journeys and adventures with founders who have raised capital on WeFunder. Huzzah! Today we have Lloyd Armbrust, CEO of Armbrust American, who's bringing manufacturing back to America, starting with surgical and N95 masks to fight COVID. You go ahead, Lloyd. WeFunder gang, take it away.
Lloyd, thanks so much for being here, man. Good to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Maybe you can start by giving us an overview of your career. Who is Lloyd Armbrust, and kind of, ending up with what you're up to today.
Wow, great. I mean, I hope you got a lot of time on your hands. Yeah, my career is varied and sundry. I think kind of to understand how I got to the place that I'm at now, I would start talking about probably the person that influenced me the most, which is my dad. I think a lot of us grew up, idolizing our parents in one way or the other. My dad was a plant manager in Duluth, Minnesota. And he was a lot older. I think when I was born, I think he was probably 52 or 53. So it was really interesting having like a much older father. And he was in the war, and he had come back. And during the war, the town that I grew up in, Duluth, Minnesota, had about 250,000 people in it. And so, of course, he got into manufacturing and production, as pretty much everyone did around that time. By the time I left Duluth, when I was 18, 19 years old, there were about 65,000 people in that town. So that just shows you how much it had shrank. Yeah.
And what time frame was that? I'm inadvertently asking you how old you are. Sorry about that. It's very rude.
No, I'm almost, I turned 40 this year. So I'm trying to be as successful as possible, so I don't feel so bad about that.
So 70s and 80s, basically.
Basically, I grew up in 1981 was when I was born in Duluth, Minnesota. But my dad was there, and when the town was much bigger, that would have been, probably 34 years before that. And there was just a massive decline in manufacturing and in production. Duluth is interesting because it sits on the world's largest freshwater lake, but it's also Lake Superior, but it's also the world's largest inland port. And the reason why that was strategically important was because you could get ships, which is a very efficient way of moving material all the way in to the interior of the United States. And so that's why it was a very popular place, especially during, World War II and other conflicts afterwards. And, just the production started going over to other countries. It just became more efficient to do so, as the labor there was just much cheaper. It just became for those reasons. And, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm all for efficiency, and I have nothing against like an interconnected world, I think, in a way that brings prosperity to everyone. And that's a good thing. But I think there is the question of at what cost, like, did we go too far? And I think in the 2019 pandemic, we really saw how far that could go. And I think a lot of us, I was just having a conversation today with one of our WeFunder investors, actually, who came by the factory, because one of the things that we do is as a perk is if you invest a certain amount, you can come actually visit the factory. That's really cool. And it's really cool to meet a lot of these folks and hear their story and hear why they invested. So actually that perk has helped me in many ways, more than I think the folks who are coming to visit. But this guy that I was talking to, he works in e-commerce. He was telling me, Lloyd, it's insane how crazy things have gotten when during the last 6 months, we couldn't keep pools, like not in-ground pools, but the inflatable pools. We couldn't keep pools in stock because the supply chain for pools, inflatable, like kids pools, right, has been disrupted. Like we can't get children's pools. And he said, I have bots scraping my site, finding out the moment that we put these pools online, and then they buy them and they sell, and we sell out instantly. And that's just an example of like how like these sort of like this interconnected world it's really impossible to map everything.
I mean, the Suez Canal was an interesting example
Exactly.
of supply chain fragility as well in recent weeks. But so
Exactly.
then segue that then into Armrest American.
Yeah. So when I left Duluth, Minnesota, there was no manufacturing jobs to have. So I actually got into the manufacturing of my day, which was software. I started a software company. In 2010, I got into Y Combinator. We raised about $10 million. And it was in 2019 that I'd taken that company and had run it for about 9 years. And I decided that I was going to buy back that company for my investors, because we got that company to about $11 million in revenue, but it just wasn't going to be, a VC exit, which,
right.
I know you want to talk about capital. Like, this is something I feel very strongly about. The VCs that were involved, like, it just didn't make sense for them to have a business that was very profitable and a very good business, but to keep that going, it's not interesting for them. So I did a lot of work. Yes, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of businesses that are great businesses. They just shouldn't be billion-dollar businesses. And the problem with VC, they're built for billion-dollar exits only. And actually, like, my wife just went through Y Combinator with her company, and she just raised $2 million on a $20 million valuation, which is insanely awesome for her to do. But when you do the math, that investor needs her to exit for $2 billion.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That
that's insane. And that's this round.
Certain routes and compels you to do certain things, like spend a lot of money on Facebook and Google ads, and it feeds the machine. Just as an aside, you and your wife, the first couple to have different startups go through Y Combinator?
I think maybe we haven't really broadcast that. I don't think she's officially announced, but I'm sure by the time that this comes out, it won't.
Scoop for the WeFunder Adventure Capital podcast.
That's right. That'll be your scoop. Yeah.
So when you said before, like, you're passionate about the capital piece, is that what you're passionate about? Like, trying to break this like crazy dichotomy, or like kind of forge the middle ground between, like, $1 billion TAM venture capital and like bank debt?
It's a great question.
Yeah,
that's a great question. I think that, like, it's just I dislike business models that are trying to take a round peg and put it in a square hole. And I think that's really just, like, there's a right move for different businesses. And I think with VC, I think if you go with the Y Combinator, every investor you talk to is going to convince you that you need to raise that kind of money. And, my wife's business actually is like a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. She's focusing on the future of work. So I think for her, it did make sense. And she went into it knowing that made sense. But I think for my last company, which was essentially like a software, it just wasn't, it didn't make any sense. And so that's what I really think is important, is like really, using the right tool for the right situation. I think that applies to, more than just capital. I think that's just a general thing in life for me.
So give us an overview then on Armrest American, and then kind of how did you raise money on WeFunder for the company?
So it was interesting timing, because in early 2020, I got to this point with the venture, and my investors, all awesome. Like, it's amazing folks. There was never really any like real pressure, but it's like, these guys give you millions of dollars. That enough was pressure for me to say, like, I need to give these guys an exit. And so I was able to basically take the company private by raising bank debt and doing what's called a leverage buyout. And so I had just done that. And my investors had gotten an exit, and it was a company that, like, again, we had thought was going to be much bigger. But I kind of did the right thing, or as I think a call at the end maybe broke even. But everyone was pretty happy with that. And so this was right when the pandemic was hitting. And I remember Sam Altman, who at one point was running YC, he was looking at this problem of the fact that we couldn't get masks, that the United States couldn't get masks for our doctors and nurses. And he said, this is a stupid problem to have. I know the solution is, let's buy a bunch of masks from China. And I'm like, that's the dumbest thing. That's like, look at the actual source of the problem, not like, which is the fact that we just can't make our own supply here. Like, look, like eggs and, meat and other things, maybe like those shouldn't be made in China. Like maybe just some things should be made locally, and that's okay. And I think PPE is one of those things. And so he put together this billion mask project, which I'm kind of like making fun of him a little bit, but it did anger me at the time because I'm like, we're just thinking about the wrong things. He said, we're going to buy a billion masks for 35 cents each. That's $350 million that he was looking to raise to buy these masks. And I'm like, guys, for way less than that. And I actually calculated, I'm pretty good at business models. So I actually, because of that, put together a business model. And I was like, I'm pretty sure for $5 million, I can create the capability of making a billion masks a year. And, sort of like teach a man to fish versus just feeding them. Right. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I remember I tweeted like in February or maybe it was January, something like, do you think this is a terrible idea to spend a couple $100,000 on a mask machine and bring it into the United States? And everyone like responded to me on Twitter, yes, this is a terrible idea. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it just myself. Right. And so I put the money together, a couple $100,000 for the first machine, got it going. And then I was talking to some of my investors just casually, because some of them are friends. And I was telling about the model I'd put together and the Sam Altman thing. And they were like, show me this model. And so I showed it to them and they're like, hey, this is really interesting. And they're like, let's work on this. And so one of the investors who's here in Austin, I kind of worked with him for probably a few days. His name's Bill Babel. We kind of iterated on it, and it was over a weekend. I sent out the information to a bunch of investors, and we ended up raising about $5 million in a weekend, just based on this. And it was like the right combination of like, investors who, trusted me because I had, given them, like I stuck with something and they knew that I wasn't going to give up. And also we're very interested in this problem because I think a lot of us were sitting around going like, seriously, we can't just make some of these masks. This is a dumb problem to have. We are America. This is a dumb problem for America to have.
So why did you decide, you raised $5 million, as you say, why did you decide to do part of that through a regulation crowdfunding campaign on WeFunder?
That's a great question. A lot of people were asking that very same thing in WeFunder. Like, it seems like you're profitable, which, we are. We have a good business. I tend to build businesses so that they're not necessarily the venture model, which is to burn as much money as possible, but to be making money. When we spend advertising, for advertising as an example, we have at least a 1x ROAS, return on ad spend. But typically we're 3 to 4x. So we want to be making money. Everything is about making money, especially in manufacturing, when you have to just hold on to so much raw materials and inventory and things like that. So a lot of people ask that, why do you want to raise money, Lloyd? Well, we have developed over the course of the last year, hundreds of thousands of super loyal customers. And I have been blown away by the amount of people who have resonated with our vision, resonated with what we're trying to do, bring strategic manufacturing back to the United States. And I said, and by the way, we had people who were like, I share this with my friends and my grandma, and I like to bring this to my church, and I like buying for all these people. I remember, Johnny, this is a crazy story. We were very early on. It was only about a month or two in, and I looked in my Shopify store, and I just sorted by one day the highest, like the high, basically who had spent the most money. And it was this local person. And she had spent like a couple $1,000 on masks. And I'm like, what is going on here? I'm like, this is very weird. Right. And so I actually reached out to her. I called her and I was like, hey, you're in Austin. We're in Austin. Why are you buying so many masks? And she's like, I'm giving them away. She's like, I'm a nurse. My husband's a nurse. And we bring them to our office. We give them to other nurses. We give them to friends. We give them to neighbors. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, well, why? Why are you doing that? And they're like, well, number one, they're really great masks. I love your masks. I think they're better than anything else. But the most important thing is we could not get these things. And it was because China was taking them. They were not letting them out of they were literally, I don't know if you know this, but 3M owns these factories, obviously in China, right? They're the largest producer in the world. And what was happening was the Chinese government was literally standing at the end of their production line, seizing masks as they came off.
Wow.
And they were doing that. And it's hard to blame them, right? Because the US government is kind of doing the same thing, to be honest. They won't let us export our masks, as an example. So they're kind of doing the same thing. But they were doing that because they wanted to protect their own people, right? You can't really blame them for that. But at the same time, it's like, that's why we need to have this here. And that's what that nurse said. And that's what so many people, I mean, go to our website, armbrustusa.com, and you're going to see right away, I think 8,800 like 5-star reviews, not the other reviews, just the 5-star reviews. And if you can scroll through all of those, and they're all just like people who understand what we're trying to do here.
So is that why you wanted to raise money like from your customers? Because you saw like, oh, this is gonna, make people even more loyal customers and kind of excited, like ambassadors for what we're doing, like write us a 5-star review. Is kind of to the question on like, why raise this money from the crowd on WeFunder? Is that kind of what was feeding into your thinking?
Absolutely. I think I'm a little bit unique, maybe for a lot of the WeFunder type companies that comes in when, I have a lot of experience raising money and I have a lot of connections.
Right.
We could have raised a lot more. We haven't even
a lot of money outside the platform, right?
Yes, we did. We raised the first 5 million, and we're probably going to end up doing a much, much larger round here in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point was exactly as you said. It was to give people access to be a part of what we're building.
Well, with 5 million caps now, Lloyd, and Regulation A now increasing the max up to 75 million. Let's talk about that next round. Okay, one kind of related question. As you say, you've raised money before. You went through YC. You've seen your wife raising money now for her startup. WeFunder is a relatively new way of founders raising capital. RegCF's been legal now for 5 years, just increased the cap to 5 million. How do you see the growth of regulation crowdfunding over the coming years? Or like what trends do you see in, kind of early stage capital raising as someone that's kind of been in this space for a decade now, maybe more?
So one of the things that I don't know if you guys certainly don't share enough of, I think, is the fact that you guys actually were the founders of WeFunder, were the pioneers in the space. They were the ones that actually wrote the original crowdfunding laws to make this possible. And that is so cool. I think you guys are literally on the bleeding edge of it, and you're on the bleeding edge of this next expansion that they're doing. And I think it's really great. I think what the internet does, like, if you want to be really generic and you want to know why things are happening and why things are being disrupted the way they are, is because the internet eliminates middlemen. That's what it does. It eliminates middlemen. And you saw that with music, right? It used to have these record deals if you wanted to get out there. And it was just literally, it was just very, very hard to get your music in front of that many people, right? And so you had to have a record deal. Now you can get on Spotify, and if you get noticed by one of the DJs on Spotify, you will get promoted, and it's very organic. But what's cool is that like you can actually be a musician on YouTube and Spotify, and you can make enough money to make a good living from 1,000 fans all over the internet. And we were talking about a world of like billions of people. Getting 1,000 fans is actually not that hard. And so that's why I think the internet is really cool, is because it's eliminating those middlemen. And it hasn't really happened to the capital markets yet, but you see a lot of these changes happening, right? You see with Wall Street bets, you see taking down some of these hedge funds, you see all these like interesting things happening. What's happening is these markets and VC is no different, are now for the first time being disrupted. When I went through Y Combinator, it was in 2010. And I remember, I think it was the founding partner of Sequoia talked to us, and he was talking about the Google investment. And my round, YC now, by the way, has about 250. I think this last round had 350 startups. When I went through, there was 26. And so it was a very small room. And it was, these super legitimate people that were coming and talking to us. And when he talked to us, he was like, what's interesting is that like there are only 300 VCs in the entire world. This was true in 2010. He's like,
Wow.
that means that like, if you met one every day, you could meet every VC that exists in less than a year. He's like, that's not that many, right? That has changed. Now there's thousands and tens of thousands of VCs and funds and microfunds and all these things. So that disruption is happening to a certain degree, but nothing is like what WeFunder is doing. Nothing is like what crowdfunding has the capability.
It's democracy, right? Like, you know, Twitter is democracy applied to journalism. Airbnb is democracy applied to hotels. And right. This is democracy applied to angel investing and early stage investing. Yeah, it's fun to be disrupting VCs, right? Because like, you know, they've kind of gleefully disrupted every industry, and WeFunder is not like anti VC by any means, right? But it's like, you know, this is now the disruption of venture capital and early stage investing, and it's kind of fun. It'll be interesting to see if that disruption is embraced with as much glee as disruption of every other industry has been over the last few decades.
What's interesting about that disruption though is it actually improves both sides, right? Because what happens, I mean, look at like it's not like there are no record companies anymore. It's not like there are no TV production companies, right?
Yeah.
Like they still exist. It's just the good ones exist, and they have to provide all of this value and prove themselves. And it's the same thing with VC. Like the VCs that are thriving today, like Andreessen Horowitz, like they're providing real value, where before it was like, here's money and that's all you got.
That's a great point. And obviously we hope we can provide value on the Reg CF side as well. I mean, it sounds like, as you're saying, you know, if we can recruit our founders an army of passionate ambassadors, customers, champions, supporters, hopefully over time, our ambition is to provide just as much, if not more value than, you know, the Andreessen Horowitz of this world. We have our work cut out for it. That's a pretty big challenge, but that's the noble aim. All right, 2 last questions for you, Lloyd. This has been very awesome, fascinating. Thanks for taking the time to do this. A couple of quick questions. One piece of advice for someone running a WeFunder campaign, and then 2, more generically, a piece of advice for someone starting a startup, maybe in the manufacturing sector.
Oh, that's a good one. So for WeFunder, I think that like, or fundraising in general, is really about 2 things when you're talking to an investor. What you have to do is you have to decrease an investor's fear that you're going to lose their money, and you have to increase their greed that they're going to lose out on this deal. If you can do those 2 things, and you can see that, you know, decreasing the fear, increasing the greed, you're providing this like gap of where they want to actually invest. That works with an individual investor, like a small like person who's given $100 to an investor who's giving, you know, millions of dollars. Like they want to decrease their fear that you're going to lose their money and increase. And I'll tell you one quick anecdote where I learned this was, Paul Buchheit is the founder he basically started Gmail. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He was around a lot in the early days of Y Combinator. He joined later as a partner, but wasn't a partner when we were there. And I remember hounding him to try to invest in my company. And it was literally like, I would just ask him every day. I mean, it was just being super annoying. And I would say stupid stuff too. Like I'd be like, oh, you have 2 kids? I have 2 kids. You should invest in my company. Like literally it was like, it was becoming a joke to me. And one day he was like, all right, come. And he just sold his company to Facebook for like $50 million. So he's like, all right, come by Facebook and come check this out. We'll go look at this. And he beats me up on how bad the product is and how shitty it is and all that stuff. And he finally, he's like, and I'm like, yes, Paul, this is all true. But the question is like, not why is a plumber investing in, you know, $50 a month in this platform that, as you point out, is a piece of shit technology that's breaking all the time. But the answer is that they don't have any other choice because they don't have any other place to go. And he like laughs because he knows it's true. And he says, all right, I'll invest, but don't lose my money. Okay. And that encapsulates the entire thing. Like he was like, I increased his greed and I decreased his fear enough. But then that fear came back a little bit. It was like, okay, don't lose my money. Okay. He was our first check-in, and we didn't lose his money. And so I think that in general is really important. And just figuring, like, put yourself in the investor's shoes, right? Like, get in front of them, get in front of as many people as possible. Talk to your mom, your cat, your dog, talk to random people in line at Starbucks. I used to do that, like buy them a coffee to like, let me pitch them until it like is just a no brainer. And that's what you have to do if you want to be able to sell this stuff to people, because that's what it is. It's a sale.
That's an awesome, very, very simple framework. Reduce fear and risk, increase greed. Okay, one last piece of advice. Someone starting a manufacturing startup in America.
Oh man, that's a tough one. I think that it really depends on your background. The biggest thing that I probably learned was that you just need to trust your gut, because I went through a lot of folks who were promising me a lot of things and were saying that they understood things, and then not knowing some of the mechanical stuff, I would dig into it. I mean, I'm not a mechanical engineer. I would dig into it and I would just try random stuff and it would start working. And I'm like, wait, if I'm figuring this out and this person's not figuring out, maybe they're not good. But then I'm like, well, I don't really know this space, so I'm going to defer. And that's the biggest thing. And I had to learn that in software too, because I'm not a software engineer either. And I did the same thing. So I think I have a hard time trusting my gut on something, but just like, if it's not sitting right with you, like as you're trying to progress things forward, like there's probably something off. Just trust your gut.
That's awesome, man. This has been great. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this. And yeah, we'll speak to you soon.
All right. Thanks so much, man.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Adventure Capital. I hope you laughed, took notes, shed a tear, and most importantly, feel ready to go off on your own adventure. And remember, whenever you are ready, WeFunder is here to help.